Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Not Your Clinical Supervisor. My name is Lauren, and while I'm not your clinical supervisor, hence the name, I am a board-approved supervisor, licensed clinical social worker, and private practice owner. And I'm so glad you're here today because today we are talking all about what to do if you encounter a situation when you're working with a client who is very anxious or depressed and you feel yourself picking up their energy and starting to feel how they're feeling. This is a really common thing that comes up, and I actually was talking to a supervisee of mine previously, and they were experiencing the same situation. They were working with the client was very, very anxious, and they started to feel like that they were absorbing that client's energy and they themselves were becoming anxious. And as the clinician, it's so important that we don't absorb that energy, but it's really hard to do. Very much easier said than done. So we're going to talk today about some basic things that you can do when this happens, because it's not preventable, to make sure that you are feeling in control, reducing your anxiety, and still able to stay present with the client because they really need you to be present. As always, this is just a reminder that this is not a replacement for clinical supervision. While I'm not your clinical supervisor, I am here to give you all the basic information that I feel like you need in order to feel confident and competent as you are growing as a mental health clinician. And so please, if you have any questions specific to clients that you're working on, situations that are arising at your agency or what have you, please talk to your clinical supervisor. Okay, so let's talk about what to do in this situation, because I myself have actually also felt this before. And so I would say it's pretty universal feeling that we all can kind of relate to or have encountered before. So you're working with a client and that client is really anxious. And maybe part of the reason that you're working with that client is because they need help managing that anxiety. So before we even talk about what to do to help the client feel less anxious, you as the clinician or the therapist in that moment need to get your anxiety under control. And so there's a couple of basic things that you can do in order to help you reduce your anxiety, have a degree of separation between you and what the client is experiencing or going through, and you stay in control of how you're feeling. So you're working with this client. I want you to envision a client that's very anxious. They may be pacing, they may be ruminating, they may be talking very fast. And this can feel easy to kind of get pulled into. So if you notice that this is happening, the first thing that I want you to do is simply just recognize, I'm feeling anxious. Something's happening between me and the client, and I'm starting to absorb this energy, and I'm feeling anxious. That's the first thing that you need to do, is simply just recognize this is happening. The second thing that you need to do is to do something to ground yourself in the moment and bring yourself back to the present and reduce your own anxiety. Now, this is something that is really important to try to do as quickly as possible so that mentally and emotionally you're not being disconnected from what is going on in the session or in the meeting, and you can stay as present and focused as possible. However, I know that this can be challenging, and so this is going to take practice, but in theory, the best case scenario would be for you to recognize it while the client's talking and quickly bring yourself back down. And so once I recognize this is happening, the first thing I do is make sure both of my feet are flat on the floor. And I take a couple of deep breaths, and I try to feel my heartbeat. I quiet my mind. I try to focus on the pressure I can feel throughout my body, all the way down to my toes pressing onto the floor. And I try to center myself. Take a couple of deep breaths. Remind yourself, I am not the client. Nothing is happening to me. I don't need to be anxious about this. I'm in control. I'm okay. If you need to, take a second and pause and do that right now just to give yourself some practice. Once you're able to feel your anxiety reduce, then we can go back to, I need to shift my focus to the client. And I need to really tune in, engaging my senses to what they're saying, what's happening for them, and be present and attending and attuning to what's going on in the moment. If you can do that, It's a lot easier to separate yourself from the client and not feel so anxious or worked up. Something else I want to throw in here real quickly is that this is so common and we are not striving for perfection. So if you're working with a client and you are noticing this is happening, I want you to just remind yourself you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be a robot. You don't need to be someone who is emotionless. You are allowed to have this happen to you. Our clients need our humanness, okay? And what I mean by that is clients don't want to come and talk to a robot who seems emotionless and has no feelings or thoughts on the matter. Now, they also don't want to come to session or to your meeting and have a therapist that's so anxious, worked up, angry, upset that it distracts them from what they're there to work on or talk about, which is themselves. If that situation happens, we are in not great waters, because at this point, we are not taking care of ourselves. We're impacting the work and we are to do no harm, and that could be potentially harmful. So we don't want to go in that direction, but we also don't want to go completely on the other side, which is we are perfect humans who never have problems and never have emotions and everything's just fine and we're very robotic. No, that's not great either. We are allowed to have these struggles pop up. And so this is not about you trying to not have this happen or make it, like I said earlier, preventable, because that's not the case. This is about how to take care of you when this does happen, because it's going to happen if it hasn't already. Now, there are going to be times where you leave a client session and you're still feeling pretty anxious or hyped up because of whatever was going on with them in the session. If this is the case, it is so important that you take care of yourself before moving on with your work. So I would not recommend immediately jumping into another session, because that means that you have the potential to take your energy, which is high, into the next client meeting. And the next client doesn't need you to be anxious. They need you to be attuning to what's going on with them and be present just for them. So take a second. If you have a couple minutes in between session, take a second, walk a lap around the building, go to the bathroom and splash some cold water on your face, get outside and feel the sunshine for a second and take a couple deep breaths, something to disconnect for just a minute. In theory, if you have a really, really anxious client that you feel like you're continuously absorbing the energy from, it's really helpful to actually make sure that you're scheduling them at a time where you don't have a client right afterwards. So this could be either the last client that you see before your lunch break or the last client of the day, so that you're intentionally not taking that energy to the next meeting, but you're also taking some time for you to take a couple deep breaths, get yourself in a place where you feel more grounded, more connected, less anxious, and you also have some time to process what was happening today that was causing me to get so anxious with them. Like, what was going on in the situation? That's really helpful information to reflect on and identify. So what I would recommend is not have them be the first person that you see in the morning or right before another client. Give yourself a little bit of a break if you can. If you are still feeling like that it's hard to disconnect from that client, then this may be something to actually take to your clinical supervisor and see if you can have a discussion about what might be coming up for you, why it might be challenging for you to not absorb that energy, and what are some things that you could do about it. So if you have an anxious client and you notice that you're absorbing this energy, or you have a client who is really struggling, really stressed, they're really depressed, they're really angry, and you're absorbing that energy, try this out. See if you can identify it's happening in the moment, ground yourself in the moment, try to bring yourself back down to a more manageable level, refocus on what's going on, and then afterwards, give yourself a break, give yourself a timeout to gather your thoughts and process how you're feeling, or talk to your clinical supervisor. All right, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope to see you soon. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and follow along for more videos to come. As always, while I'm not your clinical supervisor, hence the name, I am a board-approved supervisor and feel like it's so important for you to have all this information at your fingertips so you can be a confident and competent mental health clinician. All right, guys, I'll see you soon. Until next time, bye.